Hello everyone. This lesson is going to be on human pedigrees, and what a human pedigree is really just a family tree that is tracing a particular trait or genetic condition as it's passed on from one generation to the next, and taking a look at what is referred to as the mechanism or pattern of inheritance. So this first slide is showing us various different pedigree symbols that we will be using. You don't need to memorize these. These will be given to you on a data sheet, but the big ones are: if you see a square, that is a male. If you see a circle, that means that it's a female. If they are shaded in, that is the particular trait or condition that we are tracking throughout the pedigree. Horizontal line means that the male and the female, they are reproducing and having children. The children are shown branching off from a vertical line, and if you see these two that kind of converge at the top, that means that they are going to be twins. But again, you will be given this data sheet, so none of this really has to be memorized. This is a typical pedigree. It's a fairly small pedigree, but what it does show is that we have three different generations represented by the rows. Generations are numbered using the Roman numerals, in this case 1, 2, and 3. Individuals within each generation, they are indicated using the Arabic numbers. So we can refer specifically to one individual within this pedigree. This one would be Roman numeral number 1, individual number 2. This one over here, Roman numeral number 2, individual number 3. This one here, generation number 3, and individual number 4, and so on. So this one here, in fact, is for the genetic condition of red-green color blindness. And in fact, we'll come back and we'll take a look at exactly this example again in a few slides. So mechanisms of inheritance, how the trait is passed on from one generation to the next. We will be taking a look at 6 of these. And the first one is autosomal dominant. Remember that the term autosomal means that, at least in terms of human chromosomes, we're talking about human chromosome pairs 1 through 22. Pair number 23 are the sex chromosomes. That's going to be a different mechanism of inheritance. And if it's dominant, that means that individuals only have to have one copy in order to have this particular condition. And I give you some examples here of some human conditions that are in fact autosomal dominant. So these individuals that are affected, they have to have at least one affected parent. No difference really between the number of males and number of females that are affected. And if we do take a look at this pedigree, which is for something referred to as polydactyly, which is having more than 5 digits on your hands and your feet, that one in fact is autosomal dominant. In this pedigree, well, we do see that it is exactly the same number of males and females that are affected. It doesn't have to necessarily show that, but there shouldn't be any big and obvious difference between males and females that are affected. So from this pedigree, if it is autosomal dominant, remember we do need to eventually assign some letters. So if this condition is dominant, I'm going to use a capital A for individuals that are affected. And I'm going to use a lowercase a for individuals that I'm just going to say that they're normal, meaning that they actually, well, don't have this polydactyly. Okay, that one I'll call normal. So in terms of the genotypes, what we can have is big, 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 little, 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 and that's really what we're trying to do, is assign the genotype for each one of these different individuals within the pedigree. So what we do know is that any individuals that are not affected, if this is an autosomal dominant condition, that they cannot have the capital A. So every one of these individuals that I circled, they do have to be homozygous recessive. They will not have polydactyly. Will have 5 digits on both their hands and on their feet. All of the other individuals, that's what we're trying to find out, is what is their genotype, because they could be one of 2 possible genotypes. They could either be homozygous dominant, or of course they could be heterozygous as well, because this is a dominant condition. So we know for sure that all of these do have a capital A. And in most cases, what you can do is you can figure out what that second letter is. The way that you do that, you take a look at their children, you take a look at the parents, you go back and forth between the generations and see what you can fill in. So if we do have this male right here that we know is homozygous recessive. Where did those alleles come from? Well, one of them must have come from mom. The other one must have come from dad. So both of the parents would be carriers of this normal condition, and they would be passing that normal allele, the recessive one in this case, on to the male. If we take a look at the second generation, this male here, we already know, is going to be homozygous recessive. If we have some individuals that are normal in the last generation, that means that again, this female here must be a carrier, and she has then passed it on to individuals 3-1 and also 3-3. Some of them we can't figure out. So we can't, for example, figure out what its second one is here because this male did not have any children. These last two here, we can't in fact figure those out. They must have got a lowercase a coming from dad. So we can't in fact figure out the genotype for most of the individuals. Now a big clue for this one is that if we do take a look at this pedigree again, what we see is we have some individuals that are affected, but they have a child is not. So look for that. This is a pretty good clue, at least for a starting point, that this condition is going to be autosomal dominant. So if we go from that and take a look at this one here, this one is, again, autosomal. It's on chromosomes 1 through 22, talking about humans. This condition is PKU, which stands for phenylketonuria. I give you several other examples here for human conditions that are autosomal recessive. In the previous example, we saw that affected parents can have an unaffected child. This one is the opposite because we can see that unaffected parents are having children that are affected. So that's going to be a big clue that this condition is autosomal recessive, meaning that the parents are not affected, but they are carriers and they can pass that condition on to their children. So if it's autosomal recessive, again, we're using capital and lowercase letters, but in this case, the dominant version is going to be normal. So I'll use a capital N for normal. And the recessive version is going to be for the PKU, the phenylketonuria. So similar to what we did with the previous pedigree, we're just going to go through and assign as many or all of the letters that we can. All affected individuals in this case, they're going to have to be homozygous recessive. There are only 3 of them. Other individuals, if we take a look at generation 3 and these first 2 here, we do know, of course, that they have to have a normal version, but because they passed it on to 2 of their children, they also have to have the lowercase version as well. So that would be the genotype of these 2 parents. This individual here, we know that they got a normal version, but we actually can't tell for sure what that second letter is. So we'll just leave that as an underscore. It could be either. We can't tell because they haven't had children yet themselves, at least not in this pedigree. The other ones, again, some we can figure out, some we can't. We know that this one has to be a capital N. We know that all of these ones here, they do have to have a capital N as well. This one we know is a capital and a lowercase because the lowercase had to come from mom. But for the other individuals, we can't say for sure what that second letter is going to be. This female here, we know is normal, but also got the lowercase version from the mom. And this one here, we just know that there is a capital N, and that's probably about as far as we can go with this one. As with the previous example, autosomal recessive, this one here, again, there should really be no difference between the males and females. They are affected in about equal numbers. So we can see here that it is 2 females for every 1 male, but it will be a significant difference if there is a difference between the males and females. One other thing to look for here, not always, but sometimes it does skip a generation. So also look for that as being a clue as to whether it is autosomal recessive. On to the sex chromosomes. The X chromosome, of course, females have 2 copies, males only have 1 copy. And a few examples here: red-green color blindness, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, hemophilia, Fragile X syndrome. These are all X-linked recessive. Remember that when we start to talk about the X chromosome, a trait is on the X chromosome, you have to show it on the X chromosome. So if it's X-linked recessive, the condition, that means the normal version is dominant. So now I'm just going to take that N for normal, and I'm going to superscript it on the X chromosome. The other version, the recessive version, is going to be the lowercase n. And in this case here, this is the one that we saw before. It is for the color blindness. So that's what we're tracking as a color blindness here. So for this one, unfortunately, we don't see it all that well in this particular pedigree, but this is what you are looking for. There are many more males affected than females. There will be females affected, but males, it's much more common, and that's because males only need the one defective version. Males, of course, have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, so if that defect is on the X chromosome, they only need one copy. Females have two X chromosomes, so they would have to have two defective versions in order to have the condition, and it's just not as likely that that is going to happen. This female here would have red-green color blindness, so she would be homozygous recessive. The males, we know, have the one defective version and the Y chromosome. And then we can try and go through and fill in some of the other letters here. So the X chromosome that sons get, it doesn't come from the father. There is never father to son inheritance that is observed. So this X chromosome here in the son, it had to come from mom. Mom has a normal version, so mom has to also have the defective version. Oh, sorry, that one is the male. Male has the normal version and the Y. Female has a normal version and also the mutated version as well. If we take a look still in generation one, we know that the two individuals that we have here, again, have to have a normal version, the male with the Y, and the female, the normal version. Can we figure out that second letter? Well, we know that this female down here does have two copies of the defective version. One came from dad, the other one had to have come from mom. So this mom will have the lowercase version. Where did that come from? It couldn't have come from dad. It must have come from mom. So we can, in fact, determine this one that's passed on to this daughter, which in turn is passed on to this son here. Finishing it off on the left-hand side with generation number two, kind of similar in this case. We have the male that does not have this condition, female which doesn't either, but she is a carrier of it, and that's what is passed on to the male in the next generation. Next one here, not nearly as common, X-linked dominant. So in this case, there might be more females that are affected, or there may not be much of a difference between males and females. So in this example here, this here is the dominant version, which is on the X chromosome. So females only need one defective version, and that's the same as with the males. The next one we'll take a look at is on the Y chromosome. It's only males that have the Y chromosome, so it's only males that we will ever see with this condition. So if you're taking a look at a pedigree and it is only males and only males that will ever have this, females never have it, it's always passed on from the father to all of the sons, then that's going to be Y-linked. Very few of these because there aren't very many traits that are on the Y chromosome. And the last one is mitochondrial DNA. Most of your genetic information, most of your genes are on nuclear DNA that you find in the nucleus, but there are a few genes, the number is 37, out of about 20,000 or so human genes that are found in the mitochondria. And all of these mitochondria, the genes from the mitochondria, are all maternal in origin. You might recall that during the process of fertilization, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, the mitochondria from the sperm, they are selectively destroyed. So all of the mitochondria, all of the mitochondrial DNA, all of the mitochondrial genes in the zygote are strictly from the egg, maternal, and then all of the cells from then on, all of the cells in the individual will be only from the mother's mitochondrial DNA. So this pedigree, if we take a look at it, what we do see is that it is mother to all of the sons. So if the mother has a condition, a defect on the mitochondrial DNA, it's passed on to all of her children, sons and daughters. Mother is affected, all of the children affected. Mother is affected, all of the children affected. Mother is affected, all of the children are affected. That is the mechanism with mitochondrial DNA. So strategies for solving pedigree problems, I strongly recommend you follow this series of questions when you take a look at any pedigree. So is it only males that ever have the trait? Then a pretty good guess that it's on the Y chromosome. Is it always from mother to all of the children? Then it's going to be mitochondrial. Are there more males? And it should be pretty obvious, considerably more males than females that are affected. If yes, then it's going to be X-linked, but not just X-linked, but X-linked recessive, results in more males than females being affected. Parents not affected, but children are. Parents not affected, children are. Parents are carriers. This is an autosomal recessive condition. Parents both affected, but they can have children that are not. That's a good indication that it's autosomal dominant. And again, also look, does it skip a generation? That's a bit of a clue that maybe also it is going to be autosomal recessive. So we'll take a look at a few very simple pedigrees here first, and then finish off with some that are a little bit bigger. So again, big clues for autosomal dominant, as we just saw. Parents are affected, child is not. Start with autosomal dominant to see if that's the mechanism of inheritance. Parents are not affected, child is. That's a pretty good clue that it's autosomal recessive. Again, with X-linked dominant, these are not as common, but you might see that more females are affected than males. So in this particular case, what we do have is the condition in males, and it's being passed on to all the daughters. So keep in mind that females have 2 X chromosomes, males only have 1. So kind of look for this. If the male does have the defect, all of the daughters are going to get this, and that shouldn't be a lowercase, that should be a capital because it is dominant. So all of the daughters are going to get an X chromosome from mom, but they're also going to get this one from dad. So if the dad shows it and it is our X-linked dominant, then all of the daughters will have it. And the last one, several examples of these X-linked recessive. This one might be misinterpreted because all we see here are males that are affected. So there might be an indication that it is on the Y chromosome, but that's impossible because this male here is not affected. And it does always have to be the case that fathers are passing it on to their sons if it's on the Y chromosome. That is not the case here. We do see more males affected than females. So that means that it would be X-linked recessive. This one here, we have 3 generations. And if we sort of go through the series of questions, do we have only males affected? No, we have females that are affected. Do we have many more males affected? No, we actually have more females that are affected than males. So it could be X-linked dominant, that is possible, but there may be other things that are more likely to be the case because that one is kind of rare. Do we have unaffected individuals that have an unaffected child? No, but take a look at this here. We do have affected individuals that have an unaffected child. So that might be an indication that this is autosomal dominant. So if it's autosomal dominant, we would say that these individuals here that are affected, they have the capital A, but this lucky daughter here, she got 2 of the normal versions. This one here, do we only have males that are affected? Well, yes, that is what we have. So this one is going to be on the Y chromosome. And what we do see is the father has it, both of the sons have it. The father has it, the son has it. The father has it, both of the sons, so this one is pretty clear that the mechanism of inheritance is going to be on the Y chromosome. This one's a little bit bigger, so a little bit nicer. We have 4 generations, more individuals in each one of the generations. Do we only have males that are affected? No. Do we see mother to all of the children inheritance? No. So it's not on the Y chromosome, it's not mitochondrial. Do we have unaffected parents that have affected children? Unaffected parents that have affected children? Well, we do see that right here. Unaffected parents that are having an affected child. So that would be a good indication that this one is going to be autosomal recessive. So again, go through the series of questions and eventually you reach a point where this is probably what you would start with. So assigning the letters in this case, we would say that this one here is going to be heterozygous, and these individuals that are affected, they would get 2 of the mutated versions, the recessive versions that would result in them having this particular condition. This one here is kind of an interesting one. It could be 2 different possibilities for this. So we do see that there are more males that are affected than females. So if you actually try this out, it would probably work as being X-linked recessive. We see something else here as well, where we do have 2 unaffected individuals that have an affected child. So this one you might also try as it being autosomal recessive. This isn't a particularly large pedigree. You can try both of them, but for this one, there isn't enough information to complete it, so it could be interpreted as being either the X-linked recessive or also the autosomal recessive.